Hi, this is Brian Katzung with KCSG Power Tools for Kartra at kpowertools.com. In this video, I will be going over essential Kartra email authentication, including SPF, DKIM, and DMARC setup and monitoring. This video is intended to help non-technical Kartra users get the essentials set up with minimum effort and as little technical jargon as possible. I'll be giving an overview, and then I'll be going over some essential terms, and then I'll be giving an interactive process walkthrough. First of all, for the background, in an effort to reduce the rising tide of spam, Google and other major email service providers are increasingly requiring the use of industry-standard email authentication mechanisms as a prerequisite for delivering email to their users. These changes are general and not specific to Kartra. You should consider them a part of doing business online in the 21st century. These new requirements will impact all Kartra users who are sending email messages with a custom domain email address via the Kartra email gateway, this gateway here. You should plan to make changes by February 1st of 2024 or expect that you will begin seeing a significant reduction in email deliverability. As additional email changes made later could accidentally prevent the delivery of legitimate email by other services you have set up, the process covered here will include setting up a free monitoring account to help locate and correct these potential issues in advance. Please note that it's important to start collecting this information as soon as possible, even if you're not currently ready to act on it yet. Okay, moving on to essential terms. The first one is an email domain, and this refers to the part of an email address following the @ sign. So in this case, this is the email domain. You're probably already familiar with that. There is a variation or a specific type of email address called a return path address. And just like an email address or any regular email address has an email domain, a return path address has a return path domain. Same thing as before. It's the part that's after the @ sign. You don't really need to worry too much about the differences. You only need to know that for some of the testing that will be used later, you will need to use the return path domain instead of your standard email domain, which is usually your base domain. The next one is a web content domain or subdomain. So when you have a custom domain, in this case www.kpowertools.com, that is one of my web content domains. You'll notice in my particular case, the email domain and the web content domains are different. Yours might be the same. In this process, we are not concerned with your content domains unless they happen to be the same as your email domains. This process deals only with email domains. There are several types of domain or DNS records that we need to consider. DNS stands for Domain Name Service, and it's a distributed directory of information about internet domains and computers and a few other resources. There are a few types of DNS records that will be important in the procedure that we go through later. You'll see several of the type CNAME, and this is a DNS record that basically just redirects to another place, to either another DNS record or several different types of DNS records. But long story short, it is a redirect. It's a pointer to another place. SPF is a DNS record that specifies which computers are authorized to send mail for a particular domain. DKIM is a DNS record that's used to create digital signatures for parts of a message. These are used to help verify that they're actually from an authorized sender, and also that the message hasn't been altered during transmission. A DMARC record is a DNS record that indicates what to do with messages that fail the SPF and/or DKIM verification and validation processes, and it also says where to send reporting information about how your messages are being handled by delivery agents on the internet. So now let's get into the process walkthrough. The first step is to determine where your DNS is managed. This is typically done at your domain registrar where you lease your domain name, but it could potentially be moved somewhere else. If you've changed the name servers, you'll need to determine where that is. The next step is that you will add your email domains on the Kartra DKIM setup page. So over here, you can see an example where I've added one domain already. I will walk through the process of adding another domain. So you'll click on the Add DKIM button. You will type in the domain, the email domain that you want to use. So in this case, I'm using busres.com, and you will need to do this for the email domains that you're using in the Kartra Mail integration, or that you're using in broadcast messages or your sequences. So since I've already added busres.com, I'm going to add a second one. For this one, I'm going to use busres.com, and then come over here and click on Add DKIM Record. This is going to provide a bunch of information. Again, it's going to say log into your DNS provider and go to the DNS management section. Now we have a bunch of information that we need to add to the DNS. Now, a couple of notes here. First of all, this first host name here, this whole part here, so this pseudo-random value that's been added to my domain name, busres.com, this value here is the return path domain. So you should make a copy of that. You can click on the copy button here and then save that value somewhere. You will need this return path domain for testing later, so please make a copy of that. The other note is that when you are in the DNS management and you are adding a record, so when the interface will vary somewhat from service to service, but generally there'll be some sort of add button where it will ask you what type of record you want. In this case, the 3 records we'll be adding here are CNAME records, so drop down to CNAME. Remember, these are pointers to other places. Click on that. This first value, in CloudFlare it's called name. It may have a different type of label. It could be host or something else in your interface, but this first value has to not have your .domain on the end. So in this case, that box needs to be filled with this value. So you have 2 options. You can either simply select that value. For this one, it's just this front part. This has 2 parts before the dot and your domain. This one has 1. So you can either simply copy this value, or you can click on this button. When it says copy, click on that. Make sure it says copied, because if it doesn't say copied when you clicked on it, it didn't take, and you'll need to try again. You can go over here. When you paste the value in, if you copied the entire value, you will need to remove the dot in your domain part. Make sure you get the dot too. And now we're ready to paste the second value. The second value you'll take in its entirety. So just come over here, click copy, confirm it's copied. Paste that in here. Now, if you're using CloudFlare, CloudFlare has an option to proxy this information. There are two options. One is to proxy, and one is called DNS only. Make sure you select DNS only for all of these values. So I will add this record. And then we need to add the other two records. Again, it's going to be a CNAME record. We'll take the second value. Remember, we want this stuff before the .domain for this first value. Going to put that in here. Copy this entire value. Place in here. Make sure that it's set to DNS only. We'll save this record. We have one more to add. Again, it is CNAME. We'll take everything up to the .domain, copy that. That goes in the first box. Copy this, confirm it's copied. That goes in the second box. Make sure it's not proxied, that it's DNS only, and save that value. I must briefly apologize here because I forgot to include the step of adding the CNAME records into DNS as one of the steps in the walkthrough. That is now step 4. So what we just did in the walkthrough, it represents steps 3 and step 4. So the next step that you need to do is to subscribe to an email monitoring service if you don't have one. In this video, I'm going to use a resource called Valimail. They offer a free monitoring service. Valimail is going to help provide the value for the DMARC record that we also need to add. And setting that up takes a little bit of time to go through the process of requesting an account. So I'm going to jump ahead a few tabs here. And then I'll go back and we can test that the value of the added records are correct. So I'm just going to jump over to the Valimail here. When you go to sign up, they will ask for your name and email and some other information. When you submit the form, they do not immediately drop you into the interface for their tools. They will send you what they call an invitation email. It's just to verify that you've given a valid email address. It took a couple of minutes for their email to show up in my inbox, so be a little bit patient with that. When that shows up, click the link to verify your email address. And then once that's done, you should be able to go into the back end of the Valimail application, and you'll see something roughly like this. Initially, in your domains list, there won't be anything. I've already configured my kappacs.com domain. To add a new domain, you simply click on the Add Domain button and type in the name and go through that dialog, and it will add it to this list. Initially, the domain will not be configured. When it shows up in this list, simply click where it says Not Configured, and that will open up a new box. And it will give you the information that you need to add to your DNS to create the DMARC record. So what you would do is you would go back here and note that in this case, it's going to be a TXT record. So this is assuming that you do not currently have a DMARC record for that domain. So what you would do, I'm not going to do the entire process here, but what you would do in this case, we need a TXT or a text record, and then the value here is always going to be _DMARC. and then you need to get the content value here from this value over here. So they're going to give you a very simple starter level value for DMARC. This part at the beginning is always required for DMARC settings. They're initially going to say if mail doesn't pass the SPF or DKIM, the initial policy here is going to be ignore that fact, let it be processed anyway, and then there's going to be a piece here that says report the aggregate information about processing of your email to the DMARC report aggregator at vali.email, which is the Valimail processing service. So this is going to say for your DMARC setting, don't worry if things don't pass verification, send reports to Valimail for recording and reporting. So you can just copy this whole value to the clipboard. One more note, again, they're giving as the host the value with a domain on the end. You do not want to include your domain in that first box. So here it's just the underscore DMARC without the rest of the domain. Again, CloudFlare is smart enough to remove the domain from the end if you put the entire one in. Some interfaces may not be smart enough to do that, so I recommend that you put the part without the .domain in that box. So now we can plug in our content. So here is our v equals DMARC 1, p equals none, and then the email address as a mail to URL, where to send reports with a semicolon and a space between each part. And then you would save that, and that would create your DMARC record. Now, if you opt not to use Valimail as a reporting service for your mail processing, and I strongly recommend that you do, but if you decide not to, the simplest DMARC you can use is just to take this value and delete the RUA attribute off the end. So the simplest value you can plug in here is v equals DMARC 1 semicolon p equals none. But again, I strongly recommend that you use this free reporting service or some other similar service so that you can track the status of your email authentication. So now that we have the three CNAME records from the Kartra DKIM record. Oh, by the way, when you're done pasting that information in, you need to click this yes checkbox, and then it will let you say finish. I'm not going to complete this process, but that's what you would use for this process. It's actually connected anyway. So now that we have those three CNAME records from this DKIM information and the DMARC value from Valimail, now we can go and we can verify that we have the correct information. So I am using a website called mxtoolbox.com, and I'll include links to Valimail, another utility called powerdmarc.com, and mxtoolbox.com. I'll include those in the description for the video so you can find those there. But this is a toolbox tool called Super Tool at mxtoolbox.com. There's also a similar super tool available at powerdmarc.com. I find this one very easy to use. We can come in here, and in this particular case, I am looking at one of the two DKIM records for my domain. So you can either choose the type of lookup from the drop-down, or you can just type it at the front. So I can say DKIM and then my domain. And in the case of DKIM, it takes a selector, it takes a colon, so it's the test type, DKIM colon, your domain, colon, and then the selector. There are two selectors configured by SendGrid in the setup through the Kartra DKIM dialog. So the keys are called K01 and K012. So if I enter this value, it's going to pull up the DKIM search where it already was for kappacs.com domain selector K01, and we see that we get green check marks. Everything looks correct. It finds the value and everything passes the test for a DKIM signing key for the key 01. Let's run the same test for key K02 or selector K02. When we do that, it pulls up the other one. That looks good. The other one that uses the base domain is the DMARC record, and you can either pull up DMARC from the drop-down, or you can just say DMARC colon, and then your domain. Notice that it switched to a DMARC lookup. And so here it is pulling up the DMARC record for kappacs.com. It shows that it found the record. Everything here basically has a green check mark except for the policy part. And this is because at the moment I have policy none. It's basically just in a recording mode to see how the email will be evaluated if I apply a stricter policy. So they're basically saying I'm not using a quarantine or a reject policy, so it's not going to actually affect any email other than determining whether the emails that are being received are successfully passing the SPF and DKIM tests or not. So it's saying this is a warning that you may eventually want to change to a quarantine or reject policy so that email that is not authorized to come from your domain does not make it to the user's inbox. So this is okay for now. Ultimately, this should be a green check mark when the policy is later changed to quarantine or not. But for now, this is an expected value. So the other part that we want to check is the SPF record lookup. So we just verified the DKIM signing keys and the DMARC record. Now we want to verify the SPF lookup. And you'll note that it's not just kappacs.com anymore. This is where we need that return path domain. And for me, this is the return path domain. So when you enter that in and you do your SPF lookup, it should find the value. It should always look like this. It should have this value in it, and you should get green check marks all the way down. If all that looks good, then your records are the proper format and visible to the world as it should be. So that is step 7. Now the next step is to and I should mention that there may be a delay for some of these records appearing. It may take a little bit of time. Generally, in most places, it's near instantaneous or happens within a few minutes. For some DNS management sites, it can take longer than that. I believe Kartra says it can take up to 48 hours. I haven't encountered that personally, but sometimes they do take a little while. So check back periodically. When MX Toolbox says everything is ready to go, then you can send test emails from yourself. The process I recommend is that you go into your leads list in Kartra and send a broadcast message to one of your own email addresses. These are all example.com domain addresses. So this won't go to Gmail or a Google Workspace account, but I recommend if you don't have a Gmail or Google Workspace account that you sign up for one. That's a really important email service provider to be able to test with. But anyway, you would find your Gmail account or Google Workspace account. You would pick the account you wanted to send to. You can click here, and then from the action menu, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can say email these users, and that will launch a broadcast. You can just walk through the dialog values here and then send yourself a message immediately. Don't use the send a test message. Go through the whole process and actually deliver a broadcast message to yourself. Once you do that and you receive your message in Gmail, when you see the message come up in the list, the way to verify that you are getting the proper handling for SPF, DKIM, and DMARC is go to the triple dot menu that appears when you are viewing the message and choose the Show Original option. What it will do is it'll give you a little status block at the bottom, and then it will show you below that the actual HTML, the headers and HTML and text that make up the message. But in the top control block at the bottom of this summary, you'll see the results of the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC check. They should all indicate a pass for all three of those. And if you get the 3 passes for these 3 values, that means that you have configured everything working and that Google is seeing the proper results of the test. That means you did everything correct. Congratulations.